The morning my card was declined at the grocery store, I thought it was a small mistake. Maybe the machine was down, or the cashier had pressed something wrong. But when the second card failed, and the line behind me grew quiet, a cold little knot formed in my chest. By the time I walked out of that store with my milk left sweating on the counter, I already knew this was the kind of problem that changes a life. It was a gray Tuesday, the kind where the sky looks like an old bedsheet. I remember the sound of the automatic doors sighing shut behind me, my canvas tote bag limp at my side, my phone buzzing in my purse with a notification I didn't want to look at. I'm 67, and I've lived through cancer scares, my husband's heart attack, and bills that didn't care I was a widow. But there was something different about having plastic in my hand and being told, in front of everyone, that I had nothing. At home, the kitchen smelled faintly of last night's coffee. The little whiteboard by the fridge still had my grandson's crooked drawing of a dinosaur and the words "Love you, Nana" in blue marker. That board always softened me, even when I was tired. I set my purse on the table, took a breath, and opened the banking app my daughter had installed for me last year. "Don't worry, Mom," Diane had said back then, tapping through the screens with those quick, impatient fingers of hers. "It's easier this way. I'll set up the alerts, pay the bills online. You shouldn't bother with all that paperwork anymore." At the time, it had sounded like love. The app spun for a moment and then showed me a red banner I had never seen before. "Account restricted. Please contact your bank." My checking balance sat there like a bad joke. $43 and some change. No deposit pending. No savings to rescue it. I sat down slowly. The chair creaked under me, the same way it had creaked when my husband, Frank, used to lean back after dinner, rubbing his chest, saying he was fine. He'd been gone 10 years now, but I still reflexively turned my head to the empty chair across from me whenever life felt too big. "You seeing this, Frank?" I whispered to nobody. I'm not a foolish woman. I raised 2 children on a teacher's pension, and whatever overtime Frank could pick up at the factory. I clipped coupons, packed lunches, put off new shoes so the kids could have field trip money. We lost our small house in '98 when his union went on strike and the savings dried up, and I swore back then I would never be that close to the edge again. So I did everything right, paid every bill on time, kept a folder for each year, fat with receipts and contracts. The gas bill, the property tax, even the little donation slip from church fundraisers. "Paper doesn't lie," I used to tell my kids. "It remembers for you." Maybe that's why what came next cut so deep. I called the bank. The hold music was tinny, some piano loop that didn't quite resolve. I watched the little fruit bowl on my table, the bananas going spotty, while a cheerful recorded voice thanked me for my patience. Finally, a real woman came on the line, bright and brisk. "Mrs. Collins, I see here that your account has been temporarily frozen due to delinquency on a personal loan." "I don't have a personal loan," I said. My own voice sounded strange to me, too calm. There was a pause, the quick clacking of keys. "It looks like it was opened 9 months ago. $10,000 unsecured loan, auto pay from your checking account. The last 3 payments were missed." My hand tightened around the phone. 9 months ago, around the time Diane had been crying at my kitchen table about her husband losing his job, around the time she'd asked if she could use my address for some mail, "Just for a while, Mom, until we figure things out." "Can you email me the documents?" I managed. "The contract, whatever I supposedly signed?" "Of course," the woman said. "We have a scanned copy with your signature on file." After we hung up, I sat still for a long time. The old clock on the wall ticked loud enough to hear between my breaths. I thought of Diane's face, the way she smiled at me when she needed something, soft around the eyes, the same eyes I'd watched blink in a hospital bassinet 44 years ago. You think you know your children. You think the hard years bind you together in a way nothing can break. Standing in line for free school lunches, sewing extra buttons on hand-me-down coats, sitting beside them at kitchen tables lit by a single bulb while you explain fractions and try not to show how tired you are. You believe all that sacrifice settles into their bones as gratitude. Sometimes it doesn't. The email came with a little ping. I opened my laptop, the one my son gave me when he upgraded. The loan agreement filled the screen. My name, my social security number, my address. And at the bottom, in neat cursive, my signature. Only it wasn't my signature. It looked like someone had traced it from an old check, practiced it. The curve of the M in Margaret was just a little too wide, the T a little too sharp. My stomach turned, not from surprise, but from recognition. I had seen that same heavy-handed loop on permission slips Diane signed for her kids when they forgot to bring things home. On the back of birthday cards, when she wrote my name for the little ones. Have you ever realized, in one electric second, that the person you trust most has been standing on your shoulders instead of beside you? I thought back over the last year, Diane bringing over stacks of mail, already opened. Just junk, Mom, I'll throw it out. Watching my grandson every other weekend so they could work things out, though half the time I saw pictures later on social media of them at bars or concerts instead. The day she'd had me sign a school form without really showing it to me, just folding the top down and pointing to the line. Did you ever realize too late that you were being used? I asked the empty kitchen. My voice shook a little more now. I got up, went to the cabinet over the fridge, and pulled down the old metal file box no one else ever touched. The tabs were worn, labeled in my careful printing. Taxes, insurance, utilities, medical. I ran my fingers over them, feeling steadier with each folder I touched. Paper remembers. I knew what my real signature looked like on 100 different things. I laid a property tax receipt beside the loan document on the table. My real Margaret sat there, firm and even. The forged one looked like it was trying too hard to be me. The first crack in my heart wasn't anger. It was grief. Grief for the little girl who used to fall asleep with her head in my lap on long car rides. Grief for the woman who apparently believed I was an open line of credit instead of a person. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere far off, then faded. I heard a car door slam next door, someone's dog barking. Life going on, same as always, while my world shifted a few inches to the left. I took a deep breath, reached for a pen, and wrote the date at the top of a blank sheet of paper. If there's one thing my years have taught me, it's this. When something terrible happens, you write it down. You keep track. Not to hold a grudge, but to hold the truth. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. I only knew that this time I would not quietly absorb the damage. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that crooked signature staring back at me. Around 3 a.m, I gave up entirely and made a pot of chamomile tea. The steam curled up in the dim kitchen, like a quiet reminder that the world wasn't ending, even if it felt like something inside me was. By dawn, I sat at the table with my folder box open, papers spread around me in small, tidy stacks. I kept touching them, the way some people touch rosary beads when they pray. These papers had carried me through decades. Hospital bills from when Frank had his stent put in, letters from the school district, photocopies of my old teaching certifications. They were lifelines in manila envelopes. When the sunlight finally broke through the blinds, I dialed Diane. She didn't answer. I tried again around 9, then 10. At 11, she finally picked up, her voice groggy. "Mom, is everything okay? I was sleeping. I need you to come over," I said. My tone must have been odd because she woke up fast. Why? What's wrong? Just come. She arrived 40 minutes later, the front door banging shut behind her as she kicked her shoes off. She wore sweatpants and that old college hoodie she kept for lazy days. If I didn't know better, if I hadn't seen the forged signature, I might have believed nothing was wrong. Mom, seriously, you're scaring me. I handed her the printed loan document without saying a word. She looked at it, eyes flicking down the page, then back up at me. For a moment, her face didn't move at all. Then she laughed, a small, brittle sound. What? What is this? Why are you showing me some scam email? It's not a scam. I slid the property tax receipt across the table. That's my real signature. And that, I pointed to the loan contract, isn't. She froze again, just for a second, just enough. You think I did this? Her voice rose. Offended, wounded, almost rehearsed. I don't think, I said softly. I know. Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right shape for a lie. I watched her, this tall woman, with my eyes in Frank's quick temper. And for a heartbeat, I saw her at 16, standing in the kitchen saying she didn't crash the car when the dent was right there behind her. Mom, I would never. Diane, I said gently, don't do that. Not to me. Her shoulders slumped, the smallest crack in her mask. We were desperate, she whispered. Those words hit me like a cold wind. I wished she had denied it, honestly. I wished she had looked me in the eye and said I was wrong. Why didn't you ask me? I asked. Why didn't you come to me, honestly? Because you would have said no, she burst out. You always say no when it comes to money, Mom. You act like everything is life or death. We needed help, just until things settled. I was going to pay it back, I swear. My heart tightened. Then why did the bank freeze my account? She didn't answer. That's 3 missed payments, Diane. She stared at the floor, and suddenly I felt very old. Not frail, just worn from carrying things that weren't mine. I took a slow breath. I'm calling the bank's fraud department this afternoon. Her head snapped up. Fraud? Mom, no, you can't do that. They'll come after us. They'll garnish Michael's paycheck. I didn't do this, I said, and I won't be punished for it. Her eyes filled with tears, but I had been a mother too long to mistake guilt for remorse. These tears were fear of consequences, not of hurting me. You're really going to turn on your own family? There it was, the sentence meant to pin me down, the way she had done for years without me fully noticing. I looked at her, really looked, and something inside me shifted into place. I'm not turning on anyone. I'm standing up for myself. She pressed her palms to her forehead. Mom, please, just let me fix this. You had 9 months. We sat in silence for a long time. She rubbed her thumb over the corner of the loan document, like maybe she could smudge away what she'd done. Let me see the original email from the bank, I said. Your phone was connected to my account notifications. I need to know if you've been deleting things. She flinched. That was enough of an answer. Mom, she whispered, don't do this to us. I folded the papers and placed them in a clean manila folder. I'm not doing anything to you, but this ends today. Her face twisted. She grabbed her coat, muttered something under her breath, and left with the door slamming so hard it rattled the pictures on the wall. When the house fell quiet again, I sat back down at the table. The sunlight had shifted to the far corner, warming the faded wood. I felt shaken, yes, but clearer than I had felt in a long time. Have you ever felt a moment when your whole life rearranged itself inside your chest? I made myself a fresh cup of tea, opened the bank's fraud reporting link, and clicked the button to begin a formal dispute. My hands weren't trembling anymore. Paper remembers, And now, so would I. The bank's fraud department put me on hold for 17 minutes. I counted every second. The tone of their music was too cheerful for a situation like mine. But maybe that was the point, to remind panicked people they were still alive and breathing. I had my documents spread neatly across the table, each corner lined up as if I were preparing a lesson plan back in my teaching days. Order has always been my way of staying steady. When the representative finally came on the line, his voice was calm, professional. "Mrs. Collins, we'll need to verify a few things with you." I answered each question slowly, clearly. My social security number, my address. When I confirmed I had not opened a loan, nor authorized anyone to do so, he paused a little longer than expected. "We'll need a written statement and copies of any documents showing your legitimate signature," he said. "This includes any receipts, contracts, tax filings, anything that can help us compare." I almost smiled. If only he knew. I faxed over 20 years' worth of my life, signed bills, insurance forms, even an old rental agreement from back when Frank and I lived in a one-bedroom with a leaky radiator. Each page was a tiny piece of the woman I'd been, the woman who never imagined her own daughter would misuse her name. Afterward, I sat back and listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The house felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Around noon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was the bank's escalation officer, a woman with a steady, measured voice. "Mrs. Collins, I reviewed the documents you sent. The signatures on your legitimate records show consistent pressure and stroke pattern. The one on the loan agreement is unusual." "Unusual is a polite word," I said. She let out a soft exhale that said she agreed. "We'll be flagging this as suspected identity theft. There will be a formal investigation. We'll also freeze the loan to prevent additional charges." I thanked her, hung up, and for a moment I let my head rest in my hands, not out of defeat, but relief. A small one, a first step. Still, a mother's heart doesn't turn off like a switch. I thought of Diane pacing in her living room, telling her husband what she'd done. I imagined the blame traveling around their home like smoke, looking for a place to settle. But then I remembered the 3 missed payments, the deleted notifications, the practiced signature. A knock at the door startled me. When I opened it, Officer Holloway stood on my porch, the same officer who once came by to check in after a break-in down the street. Middle-aged, kind eyes always smelled faintly of cedar. For a second, I wondered if Diane had done something drastic. "Afternoon, Mrs. Collins," he said, adjusting the notepad in his hand. "We received a report from your bank, identity theft case connected to your account. I'm here to collect a statement and verify a few details." My stomach fluttered, not from fear, but from the surreal nature of it all. A police officer on my porch because of something my own child had done. Life has a way of aging you in the span of one breath. I stepped aside. "Come in." He sat at the kitchen table, scanning the neatly arranged papers. "You're very organized," he remarked. "I had a lifetime of practice," I said. "Raising 2 kids and paying bills before online banking existed will do that to a woman." He gave a small smile, then turned serious. "These signatures clearly don't match." Hearing it from an authority, someone who had no stake in my family dynamics, brought a strange kind of validation. Not satisfaction, just truth settling into its rightful place. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" he asked gently. I met his eyes. "Yes." Silence filled the room, heavy but honest. "Mrs. Collins," he said quietly, "I know this isn't easy, but I want you to understand this isn't your fault. You're doing the right thing." A warm sting gathered behind my eyes. I blinked it away. He walked me through the steps, how the formal police report would work, how the bank would cooperate. how the burden of proof didn't fall on me anymore. He took photos of the documents with a small department-issued tablet, his movements steady, respectful. When he finished, he slid his card across the table. If anything else happens, calls, messages, even conversations that don't feel right, you call me directly. Thank you, I said. My voice wavered slightly, but he didn't mention it. After he left, the house went quiet again. Afternoon light spilled across the table, warming the edges of my neatly stacked papers. I sat down slowly, letting out a long breath that seemed to come from a place deeper than my lungs. Have you ever felt the moment when something inside you finally, quietly, stopped hoping a person would change? I wasn't angry. Not yet. Not really. It felt more like the soft ache that comes when you finally press a bandage to a wound you've ignored for too long. I gathered my papers, slid them carefully into their folder, and placed it in my metal box. When I closed the lid, it clicked shut with a sound that reminded me of a door finally locking for good. For the first time since the grocery store, I felt steady. Not whole, but steady. And something else, too. Resolute. The next morning began with a silence so deep, it felt like the walls were listening. I woke before the sun, the way I used to on school days, when lunches needed packing and permission slips needed signing. Old habits don't disappear. They just wait. I made oatmeal, let it cool, and only managed a few bites. The rest sat untouched, the spoon leaning against the bowl like it had given up halfway. My mind kept circling the same thought. Diane hadn't called. Not to apologize, not to explain, not even to yell. That kind of quiet from her was its own answer. Around 10, I opened my email and saw 3 new messages, one from the bank, one from the fraud investigator, and one from my homeowner's insurance reminding me my premium was due. Life doesn't stop for heartbreak, no matter how much you wish it would. I printed the bank's update. They had officially marked my account under protection. A temporary reimbursement would be issued in 10 business days. I felt a slow exhale leave my chest. Stability, just a sliver of it, was returning, but mixed in with that relief was an ache I wasn't ready to name. I spent the next hour going through old folders, checking every document with my name on it. Car insurance, property tax records, a years-old dental bill. Each one felt like reopening a scrapbook of responsibilities I'd carried alone after Frank died. Pages full of careful handwriting, the corners worn soft from being handled. I paused at a medical invoice from 11 years ago, the last ER visit before Frank passed. His signature was shaky, but still his. I traced it lightly, remembering how he used to hold his pen too tightly. His absence felt louder in moments like these, when a husband's steady voice might have cut through all the chaos. "Frank," I murmured, "I could use your clarity today." The doorbell interrupted me. When I opened it, a woman stood on my porch. Short, dark hair, business card already in her hand. "Mrs. Collins? I'm Anna Reyes from the bank's fraud investigation team. I'm following up in person because of the size and nature of your case." I blinked. "In person?" "That signature discrepancy you identified," she said gently. "It's consistent with long-term access to your financial documents. We wanted to ensure your safety." My safety. The words felt foreign. She stepped inside. And we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Diane had once spilled an entire bottle of glue at age 7, crying because she ruined her school project. I remembered helping her fix it, piece by piece. Now another woman sat where that little girl once had, examining evidence of something far worse than spilled glue. Miss Reyes reviewed my papers with sharp attention. "It's clear these signatures aren't yours," she said. "We'll process the dispute quickly. This is Unfortunately, not uncommon when family members have access to personal information. That sentence hung in the air between us like smoke. I swallowed. How often does this happen? More than you'd think, she said softly. And it's always hardest on the parents. Hardest. A word too small for the storm inside my ribs. She took a statement, made copies of the files, and reassured me repeatedly that I'd done everything right. Not once did she ask why I let Diane handle my mail or banking alerts. Not once did she imply I was careless. She simply treated me like someone who deserved respect. Before leaving, she placed a small brochure on the table. Identity restoration services, she said. They can help secure your accounts going forward. After she left, the house felt warmer somehow, maybe from sunlight shifting through the curtains, maybe from the quiet validation of being believed. I made myself a fresh cup of tea and sat by the window watching a neighbor walk her dog. Normal life, simple life. I wondered when mine had stopped being simple. The phone vibrated. Diane. For a moment, I just stared at her name. My thumb hovered over the screen before I finally answered. "Mom," she said in a tight voice. "I heard a police officer came to your house." "Yes," a shaky breath on her end. "You reported me?" "I reported a crime." She went silent, and I could hear her trying to compose herself. I could almost picture her pacing, hand in her hair, telling herself I was being cruel. "How could you do this?" she finally whispered. My heart squeezed. "How could you?" The line stayed quiet. Then she said, "You're ruining my life." I closed my eyes. "Diane, you ruined your life the moment you pretended I wasn't a real person with real consequences. You're my mother, and you used my name like a spare key," I said, voice calm, "to open a door you had no right to." Her breath hitched. "You don't understand. We needed help." "Help is something you ask for," I said softly, "not something you steal." Silence again. Then, click. She hung up. I set the phone down carefully, as if mishandling it might break something deeper. The ache in my chest wasn't anger. It was mourning. This wasn't a fight. This was the unraveling of a bond that had been fraying for years. Have you ever realized a relationship ended long before you admitted it? The afternoon stretched on quietly. I updated a notebook with dates, names, and every step taken so far, just as Officer Holloway advised. Not out of spite, out of necessity. By the time the sun dipped low, I felt tired in a way that seeped into my bones. But underneath the exhaustion was something steadier, something almost hopeful, a sense of reclaiming my own life, inch by inch, even if it hurt. I woke up the next day with a heaviness behind my ribs, the kind that doesn't go away just because you slept. Still, when my feet touched the floor, something in me felt anchored. Maybe it was knowing the truth was finally written down somewhere official, instead of only swirling in my head like a guilty secret. The morning light was soft, pale, almost apologetic. I moved slowly through my routine, opened the blinds, fed the small fern by the window, brewed a pot of coffee. The smell alone made the house feel less empty. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the steam rise in quiet little curls. On mornings like this, when my mind spun, I used to talk things through with Frank over breakfast. He wasn't a man of many words, but he always listened in that steady way of his. Now, I had only this house and its familiar creaks to listen back. Around 9, I drove to the bank for a scheduled follow-up meeting. The car ride felt long even though the branch was 10 minutes away. Every red light made my stomach flutter. I hadn't been inside a bank in years. Diane had convinced me digital banking was easier. I suppose it had been easier. For her. The bank lobby was cool and quiet, with the faint scent of disinfectant and carpet that had been vacuumed too many times. A teller guided me to a small glass-walled office where Ms. Reyes waited. She stood as I entered, offering a warm smile. "Mrs. Collins, thank you for coming. Please sit." I eased into the chair across from her. The desk between us held a neat stack of printed documents with color-coded sticky notes. "We've compared the signatures you provided," she said, sliding one page forward. "This is your verified signature from last year's tax filing." I nodded. "And this," she placed the loan document beside it, "is the forged one." Side by side, the difference was undeniable. My real signature flowed naturally, shaped by decades of bills, school forms, and checks signed at kitchen tables. The forged one looked stiff, careful, too balanced, like someone copying a shape they didn't fully understand. My hands folded in my lap. "It's strange," I said softly, "seeing yourself written by someone else." Ms. Reyes gave a sympathetic nod. "Identity theft always feels personal, but when it's someone you know, it hits deeper." I didn't trust myself to speak. She continued, "We'll be submitting this to our internal fraud panel today. Given the evidence, I expect full approval of restitution. Your account will remain protected in the meantime." A breath I didn't realize I was holding slowly escaped. But then she added, "One more thing. The person who opened the loan used an email address very similar to yours, one character off. That's how they routed the initial confirmations without you seeing them." My chest tightened. I remembered how Diane used to joke about how old-fashioned my actual email was. I remembered her offering to clean out the spam. I remembered trusting her hands with my phone. "Would you like us to help you set up new security measures?" Miss Reyes asked. "Yes," I said. "Please." We spent the next hour going through every layer. New email, new two-factor authentication, new passwords. It felt like building a small fortress brick by brick. Every step made me feel a little stronger. When I left the bank, the sun had risen high enough to warm the hood of my car. The wind was cool, carrying that early hint of spring. I stood there a moment, letting the sunlight touch my shoulders. But the peace didn't last long, because my phone began to buzz non-stop as soon as I turned it back on. 5 missed calls from Diane, 2 voicemails, and a single text. "We need to talk. You're making a huge mistake." A familiar ache pulsed through my chest, but I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the local library, a place that had always felt like safe ground. The moment I walked in, I breathed easier. The soft hum of computers, the quiet turning of pages, the faint scent of old paper, all of it felt like a gentle hand on my back. I took a seat in a corner armchair and opened my notebook. Dates, times, conversations, everything documented. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. A librarian I recognized, an older man named Gerald, passed by and smiled. "Good to see you, Margaret. Haven't seen you in a while." "I'm getting my life organized again," I said with a small smile. "Good thing to do," he replied. "Spring cleaning of the soul." I liked that phrase. After a while, I stepped outside into the crisp air, and there, parked crookedly in front of my house when I returned, was Diane's car. My breath caught. She stood on the porch, pacing with her arms folded tight across her chest. When she saw me, she hurried toward the driveway. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking, "please, we need to talk." I locked my car and faced her squarely. "I told you yesterday, this has to go through the proper channels." Her face twisted in frustration. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to us?" "What you did," I corrected gently, "was to me." She flinched. "I was going to pay it back," she whispered. "Then why didn't you?" Her silence answered for her. I looked at her, the way she kept shifting her weight, the way her eyes kept darting around, the way her hands trembled just slightly. She wasn't here for reconciliation. She was here out of fear. Mom, can't we handle this privately? As a family? You stopped that being an option when you forged my name. Tears filled her eyes, but they didn't fall. She swallowed hard. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said softly. But you did. She stared at me for a long moment, something deep and frantic flickering behind her eyes. If the investigation goes forward, they're going to ask who had access to your documents. Yes, I said. And they're going to figure it was me. I didn't respond. Sometimes the truth doesn't need an echo. Finally, she whispered, Please, don't let them ruin my life. I felt my heart break again, cleanly this time, quietly, but something inside me also straightened, like a spine long bent under weight finally standing tall. Your life isn't being ruined, I said gently. It's being redirected, and this is the consequence of your own choices. Her face crumpled, not in remorse, but resentment. She turned, marched to her car, and drove off without another word. I stood in my driveway as the wind swept around me, cool and steady. Have you ever realized you were the only person willing to protect yourself? I unlocked my front door, stepped inside, and let it close softly behind me. And for the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like peace beginning to make room. The next day began with a soft gray sky, the kind that makes everything feel muffled, like the world is wrapped in thick cotton. I moved through the house in slow circles, picking up a mug here, smoothing a throw blanket there, listening to the silence settle into its corners. There's a certain quiet that arrives only after a storm, the kind that doesn't calm you, exactly, but lets you gather yourself. My phone was face down on the counter. It had been buzzing intermittently all morning, but I didn't turn it over. Diane's voice, pleading, then angry, then pleading again, still echoed faintly in my mind. I wasn't ready to hear more. Around mid-morning, I decided to drive to the police station. Officer Holloway had told me I could add supplemental information to my report anytime, and after yesterday's encounter with Diane, I realized I needed everything documented. Not out of spite, out of caution. A lifetime of teaching had taught me, if something isn't recorded, it can be rewritten by whoever speaks loudest. The police station smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. A young receptionist pointed me to a small room with glass walls and 2 chairs. Holloway entered a minute later, notepad in hand, offering that same calm nod. Mrs. Collins, he said, good to see you again. What can I add to your file today? I sat, smoothing my skirt. Yesterday, my daughter came to my house. She confronted me, rather emotionally. Did she threaten you? No, I said softly. But she pressured me. She begged me to stop the investigation. Holloway nodded, writing quickly. Did she admit involvement? I hesitated. My voice felt small in the room. She didn't use the words, but she didn't deny it. He looked up. Would you feel safer if we issued a no-contact warning? I shook my head. No, I'm not afraid of her. I just need this to be clear, for the record. Understood. He made a few more notes and slid the statement form toward me. My hand didn't tremble when I signed. When he was done, he leaned back a little. You're handling this better than most people would, he said gently. Family cases are always the hardest. You'd be surprised how many people back out of reporting once the emotional pressure starts. I sighed. It's not easy. I know. His voice was kind, not pitying. Tears stung the back of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I wasn't here to fall apart. After I left the station, I drove to the grocery store, the same one where my card had been declined days earlier. Walking through the entrance felt like stepping back onto a stage where something terrible had happened. But this time, I had cash in my wallet and a bank moving to restore what had been stolen. Inside, I moved slowly through the aisles. I grabbed apples, bread, a small rotisserie chicken, mundane things, necessary things. The sound of carts rolling across linoleum felt oddly grounding. As I waited at the checkout, I felt my shoulders loosen. No declined cards, no embarrassed stares, just a simple, quiet transaction. Back home, I placed the groceries on the counter and brewed a cup of black tea. While the kettle hummed, I finally turned my phone over. 8 missed calls from Diane, then a voicemail from her husband, Michael. My heart thudded. I tapped play. "Mrs. Collins," his voice said, low and flat. "I don't know what Diane told you, but you need to understand. We're drowning over here. She's terrified. I'm terrified. If she gets charged, if this goes on," his voice cracked slightly, "we'll lose everything." A pause. "Please call us back. Please." I stood there for a long moment, the kettle clicking off behind me. I felt that familiar ache, the old instinct to rush in, to fix, to soothe. But then another thought rose. Quiet, firm. I didn't put them in this position. They put me in it. The phone buzzed again. This time a text from my son, Eric. He lived 3 states away and checked in sporadically, though always kindly. "Mom, Diane called me. Said there's family drama? What's going on?" I swallowed hard. My children had grown up in the same house, with the same values, the same lessons, and yet somehow they had become such different adults. I typed back, "I'm handling it. I'll call you tonight." I made tea, then carried it to the back porch. The air was crisp but gentle, carrying the faint scent of pine from the neighbor's yard. I sat in the old rocking chair Frank refinished the summer before he died. The wood was warm against my back. For a while I just rocked, letting the world settle around me. Have you ever felt your heart shifting between guilt and strength, like a tug of war you never asked to join? I thought about Diane's voice, the pleading, the fear, and how familiar that dynamic had become over the years. She made a mistake. I fixed it. She got overwhelmed. I stepped in. She fell behind. I filled the gap. Always just this once. Always just until things get better. But patterns aren't accidents. They're habits. And I finally realized I had been allowing mine. The sun dipped lower, turning the porch rail a warm gold. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth ease through me. Inside the house, the clock ticked steadily. A sound that used to annoy me, but now felt reassuring. A rhythm I could trust. For the first time in days, my chest didn't feel tight. I wasn't happy, I wasn't free yet, but I was claiming my ground, inch by inch. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something I had forgotten how to feel, my own life returning to me. I woke the next morning to a quiet house, the kind of quiet that feels intentional, like the world is giving you permission to breathe. The sun was just beginning to peek over the tops of the trees outside my bedroom window, brushing everything with a pale, hopeful glow. I sat up slowly, letting my joints complain in their usual way, and wrapped a shawl around my shoulders before padding into the kitchen. The kettle hissed softly as it warmed. I leaned against the counter, feeling the faint vibration beneath my palm, and realized something surprising. For the first time in nearly a week, I didn't wake up with my heart racing. Maybe it was a fragile kind of calm, the kind that could shatter if someone slammed a door too hard, but it was calm nonetheless. While the tea steeped, I opened the notebook where I'd been documenting everything. Dates, conversations, bank calls, police statements. The pages were starting to fill up. Something about seeing the truth written down in my own handwriting made everything feel real, contained, manageable. I was rereading my notes from yesterday when my phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't Diane. It was the fraud department. I hesitated before answering, then forced a steady breath. "Mrs. Collins," the investigator said, "I'm calling with an update on your case. We've completed the initial handwriting analysis, and the findings strongly support your claim. The loan will be formally reversed pending the final review." I closed my eyes. Relief washed through me, warm and slow, like stepping into a patched-up home after a long winter storm. "Thank you," I whispered. "Additionally," she continued, "the loan officer who approved the paperwork will be interviewed. There were discrepancies in the ID verification process." That startled me. What kind of discrepancies? "It seems the identification used may have been a photocopy," she said carefully. "We need to investigate further." I gripped the edge of the countertop. I remembered Diane once asking to borrow my ID for a minute, to scan it for a job application. She'd laughed when I asked for it back immediately. "Relax, Mom. It's just a picture." And I had. After I hung up, I stood there for a long moment, letting the news sink in. Then, I poured a fresh cup of tea and walked out to the porch. The air smelled of damp earth and spring, fresh, alive, forgiving. A few minutes later, my neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker, shuffled outside to check her mail. We'd chatted over the fence a handful of times, mostly about weather and gardening, nothing deeply personal. But today, when she glanced over and offered a little wave, something in me softened. "Morning," she called, adjusting her sweater. "You're out early." "I'm trying to start the day on a good note," I said with a small smile. "Best way to do it," she nodded. "Come by later if you'd like some lemon bars. I made too many again." Her simple kindness warmed me more than the tea. Maybe healing didn't need to be dramatic. Maybe it could begin with small, steady connections. Neighbors who baked too much, a porch that caught the morning sun, a kettle that hummed patiently even when life was loud. Around noon, I finally checked my voicemail. There were 2 new messages, both from Diane, both sounding more frantic than before. "Mom, I know you're upset, but please just talk to me." Followed by, "If you don't stop this, they're going to ask me to come in for questioning." A long pause. "Are you really going to put me through that?" I set the phone down gently, though inside something twisted sharply. Her words felt like small, sharp pebbles thrown against a window. Not enough to shatter anything, but enough to remind me she still believed I was responsible for holding her life together. I whispered into the empty room, "I didn't put you here." Then I added the date and her messages to my notebook, not as revenge, as record, as truth. By afternoon, I found myself restless. I didn't want to sit inside with the weight of Diane's voice bouncing around the walls, so I went for a drive, to nowhere in particular, just letting the road carry me. I ended up at the small lake on the far end of town. There was a picnic table near the water, weathered and carved with little hearts and initials. I sat there and watched the ripples move slowly across the surface. Ducks drifted by in pairs. Somewhere behind me, a child laughed. Life, normal life, kept happening, whether or not my heart was ready for it. Have you ever had a moment where you felt suspended between the person you used to be and the person you're becoming? That's what the lake felt like a threshold. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Diane or the bank. It was Eric. "Mom, I'm flying out tomorrow. I want to be there." Tears prickled unexpectedly at my eyes. Eric, with his quiet steadiness and gentle heart. He had his own family, his own responsibilities, yet he was coming anyway. I texted back. Thank you, I'd like that. After a while, as the sun began dipping behind the trees, I headed home. The house didn't feel lonely when I stepped inside. It felt like a space I was reclaiming, slowly, carefully, with both hands. I made myself a simple dinner: chicken, sliced apples, a little rice. I ate it at the table with soft music playing in the background, something jazz-like, something warm. And for the first time all week, I didn't feel weighed down by the next phone call or the next confrontation. I felt grounded, like the earth beneath me was holding steady again. Maybe the storm hadn't passed yet, but I was learning how to stand in it without being swept away. I woke the next morning feeling a strange mixture of strength and softness, as if the ground beneath me was still shifting. But I finally trusted myself to stay upright. The light filtering through the curtains was bright, almost golden, and for a moment I just sat there on the edge of the bed, breathing it in. Healing doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it's as simple as waking up and realizing the fear that once lived in your chest has quieted a little. Eric's plane wasn't due until the afternoon, so I had a few hours alone. I made coffee, buttered a slice of toast, and sat by the window watching the street outside slowly come to life. Cars eased down the block. A jogger passed with a dog trotting beside him. Life moved forward without asking my permission. I checked my email. There was a message from the bank's internal review team confirming the investigators' findings. The loan was officially suspended, pending full reversal. My account, it said, was secure. Such a small word, but it hit me deep. Secure. Something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I brewed another cup of coffee and pulled out my notebook, adding the new updates. The list of documented facts was growing. With each entry, I felt less like a victim and more like a woman, carefully reclaiming her life one line at a time. At noon, I headed to the airport. The drive felt different from the ones earlier in the week. My shoulders didn't curl inward. My breath didn't sit high in my chest. It was almost peaceful. As I waited at the arrivals gate, I saw Eric walking toward me, tall, calm, his face breaking into a warm, steady smile. He hugged me first, tight and grounding. "Hey, Mom." "I'm glad you're here," I whispered. On the drive home, he didn't push for details, not right away. We stopped for sandwiches at a small deli we used to visit years ago. He carried the tray, pulled out my chair. Small gestures, but they wrapped around my heart like a familiar blanket. Once home, we sat at the kitchen table, the same table that had held so many difficult conversations over the years. I pulled out the folder and notebook, placing them gently in front of him. "Eric," I said quietly, "I need you to read this." He opened the folder slowly, carefully. His brow tightened as he scanned the loan contract, the forged signature, the timeline of bank notices. When he reached the part where Diane confronted me on the porch, he lifted his eyes to mine. There was no anger in them, just a deep, steady sadness. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm so sorry." I nodded. "I know. She shouldn't have done this. Any of it." We sat in silence for a while. Not the heavy, painful kind, just the kind where two people finally see the same truth. "Do you want me to call her?" he asked. "No," I said gently. "This is something she has to face, not something you can fix for her." He nodded, accepting that, even if it hurt him. Later in the afternoon, we walked around the block. The air was crisp, the sky bright. A few neighbors waved, Eric waved back. For the first time in days, I felt the world wasn't closing in on me. When we returned home, a new voicemail was waiting. Not from Diane this time, but from the bank's legal department. "Mrs. Collins," the voice said, "we'll need you to come in tomorrow morning to finalize the affidavit. This will move your case into full resolution. Once signed, no further responsibility will fall on you. I felt Eric's eyes on me as I lowered the phone. "This is good news," he said. "It is," I whispered. And it was, but it also marked a point of no return. Once the affidavit was signed, Diane would no longer have room to rewrite the story. No way to pretend this was a misunderstanding or a shared mistake. That night, Eric cooked dinner. Simple pasta, a little salad. We ate while soft music played. The house felt warmer with him in it. Softer. The kind of warmth that lets your shoulders finally fall. After the dishes were done, we sat in the living room. He picked up an old photo of him and Diane on the first day of school, her grinning wildly, him shyly clutching his lunchbox. Eric sighed. "She's been sliding for years, Mom. You can't catch someone who doesn't want to stand." My throat tightened. "It still hurts." "I know." We sat there quietly, the lamp casting a warm pool of light across the room. Outside, a dog barked somewhere in the distance. The clock ticked gently. Life continued forward, steady as breath. Have you ever felt grief and relief woven together so closely you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began? That's what the evening felt like, a bittersweet weave of both. Before bed, I stood by the window watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. My home felt different. Not broken, not haunted by what Diane had done, but grounded, like a place I could rebuild from. Eric passed by on his way to the guest room and placed a gentle hand on my arm. "We'll handle tomorrow together," he said. "Thank you," I murmured. After he disappeared down the hall, I looked out at the quiet street once more. For the first time in a long time, the night didn't feel heavy. It felt like a turning point, a small light guiding me towards something steadier, something truly my own. The next morning came with a quiet seriousness, as if the day itself knew what it was about to ask of me. I woke before the alarm, the house still, and blue in the early light. Eric was already in the kitchen when I walked in, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He handed one to me without a word, and for a moment, it felt like I was standing beside Frank again, someone steady, someone on my side. "You ready?" Eric asked gently. I nodded, though a small tremor ran through my fingers as I wrapped them around the warm mug. As I'll ever be. We drove to the bank in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, just the shared quiet of 2 people bracing for something that needs to be done. The sky was overcast, low clouds hanging like faded curtains. It matched the heaviness in my chest. Inside the branch, the air smelled faintly of printer toner and polished wood. Miss Reyes met us at the entrance and guided us to a private conference room. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Collins," she said warmly. "This is the last step on your end." On the table sat a stack of papers clipped neatly together. My name printed at the top of the affidavit in crisp black letters. Seeing it there made everything feel more real, more final. "This statement," she explained, "confirms officially that you did not open the loan and that the signature on the contract is not yours. Once signed, the legal responsibility shifts fully away from you. Our fraud team will proceed with recovery and, if necessary, charges against the responsible party." Eric sat beside me, his presence a quiet anchor. I read each line carefully. My hands didn't shake this time. I had lived every moment of the truth this document held. When I reached the bottom, I picked up the pen. As my signature flowed onto the page, something inside me loosened, something I hadn't realized had been knotted tight for months, maybe years. "Thank you," Ms. Reyes said softly. "We'll take it from here." When we stepped back outside, a soft drizzle had begun, the kind that feels more like mist than rain. Eric opened his umbrella over us, and for a moment, as we walked to the car, I leaned into the warmth of that small protection. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. Another voicemail from Diane. I didn't listen. Not yet. Not while the ink on the affidavit was still drying. Back at the house, we made lunch. Leftover pasta warmed on the stove. A few slices of bread toasted crisp. Simple, grounding food. As we ate, Eric studied me with that same careful expression he used when he was little and trying to figure out if I was upset about something. How are you really doing? He asked. I took a slow breath. Like I'm finally stepping into my own life again, I said. But also, like I'm grieving someone who hasn't died. He nodded gently. That makes sense. After lunch, he offered to fix the sagging cabinet hinge in the kitchen. I watched him work. Steady hands, thoughtful movements. The kind of reliability that grows from character, not obligation. It warmed something in me I thought had gone cold. Later, I went for a walk alone. The neighborhood felt familiar again, not like a maze of anxieties. The air smelled of wet pavement and budding trees. A few children played down the street, their laughter bouncing off the houses like tiny bells. I paused by the community garden where Frank and I used to volunteer. Small shoots were pushing through the soil, unaware of the storms overhead. Have you ever looked at something growing and felt the quiet reminder that life doesn't stop because your heart is tired? By the time I returned home, my shoes damp from the rain, I felt lighter, not healed, but on the path. Eric was in the living room scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I came in. Mom, he said carefully, Diane texted me. I froze for a moment. What did she say? He hesitated. She's scared and angry, mostly angry. I nodded slowly. That's her way. He exhaled. She wants to talk to you. I know, I said quietly. But not today. Eric didn't push. He never had the way Diane did. Instead, he simply stood and rested a hand on my shoulder as he walked past. A small gesture, but enough to steady me. That evening, we made tea and sat in the living room with the lamps low, a kind of peaceful hush settling over the house. Eric talked about his kids, their school projects, the new puppy they'd adopted. I listened, letting the warmth of his voice fill the spaces that had felt so hollow all week. As the night deepened, he yawned and said goodnight, leaving me alone with the soft hum of the house. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street, the glow of porch lights reflecting off the wet pavement. For the first time in a long while, I felt something gentle bloom in my chest. Hope. Not for Diane, but for myself. For the life I still had waiting for me. And for the small, steady truth that had carried me through the worst of this. When someone takes something from you, your trust, your peace, your dignity, you can take it back. Quietly, firmly, and completely. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen window in long, warm bands, touching the table where the last week of my life had unfolded. I sat with a mug of coffee cupped between my hands, feeling the heat seep into my palms. Eric had left before dawn to catch his flight home. He'd kissed my cheek, told me he loved me, and promised to call that evening. The house felt quieter without him, but not empty. More like it had taken a deep breath along with me. I spent the first part of the day doing small things, watering the fern, folding a load of laundry, sweeping the porch. Ordinary tasks, the kind that remind you you're still here, still moving forward. The storm was behind me, and even though its shadows lingered, they no longer dictated the shape of my days. Mid-afternoon, I finally listened to the last voicemail from Diane. Her voice was softer than before, almost timid. Mom, they called me in. I don't know what to do. I'm scared. Please call me. I sat very still after it ended. Once, that tone would have sent me running to her, ready to fix everything, to carry the weight she refused to hold. But now, I felt something different. Sadness, yes, but also clarity. She wasn't reaching out to acknowledge what she'd done. She was reaching out to avoid the consequences of it. And I couldn't be that barrier anymore. I deleted the voicemail gently, the way you'd close the door on a memory that can no longer guide your life. Have you ever realized that letting go is an act of love? For yourself? A little later, Officer Holloway called to let me know the final pieces of my case were finished. "You won't need to testify," he said. "The evidence is overwhelming. You're officially cleared of all financial responsibility." I thanked him and meant it. The relief wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, like settling into a chair that finally fits your back. After the call, I took a long walk around the neighborhood. The sky was bright, the air tinged with that early summer warmth. Mrs. Whitaker waved from her yard and brought over a small plate of lemon bars. I laughed when she insisted I take them. "You look like you could use something sweet," she said. Maybe she was right. Back home, I made tea and sat on the back porch. The rocking chair creaked softly under me. Birds chattered in the trees. A gentle breeze moved lazily across the yard. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt peaceful. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally understood I didn't need to fix what wasn't mine. When the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, I closed my eyes and let the moment rest on my shoulders like a warm shawl. I realized something then. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about return. A return to myself, to my boundaries, to the quiet confidence I'd buried under years of caretaking and guilt. And in that realization lived a kind of freedom I didn't know I still had the right to feel. If you've ever found yourself giving until nothing was left, maybe you understand. Maybe you've stood at the edge of your own breaking point and wondered if you were allowed to choose yourself. You are. As the evening settled in, I whispered something into the fading light, a small promise to the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. I won't disappear again. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. Thank you for walking through this story with me. If it touched you in any way, I'd be grateful if you liked the video and subscribed for more of these true-hearted journeys. And tell me, if you were in my place, what would you have done?